I'm Carmelyn Morales. I am the Chair and Commissioner for the New York City Commission on Human Rights, and I'm calling to order and convening our last Commissioners' Quarterly Meeting for fiscal year 2017. Today is June 28, 2017, and present we have, I'm just going to ask the Commissioners to go around the table, and if you could just say your name and you're here. We'll do formal introductions a little bit later.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Greenspan, Commission Board Member.
Hi, Dr. Demetrius Carolina.
Stephen Choi.
Faiza Patel.
Gurdev Singh Kang.
Bishop Gonzalez.
Kari Masara White.
Kathy?
Kathy Alderson.
Excellent, thank you. So we have an exciting agenda today. We're going to start off. I know there's some people who have said they might have to leave early, so I want us to try to keep to agenda as much as we can. But it's very exciting because, as I said earlier, we are voting on adoption of some final rules, which is an exciting thing for the City Commission on Human Rights. One of the areas that we're going to be adopting a rule on, hopefully, is on the Fair Chance Act, which is the city's ban the box protection. It is widely considered the nation's strongest ban the box protection because it covers both public and private, most public and private employers. It first became effective in, October of 2015. Following that, we initiated rulemaking. We had a notice and comment period. We had a public hearing on it. We have now coordinated all of the comments and all of the formal written comments, as well as suggestions that we have received from the public. At the last meeting, we voted on the ability for my office of the chair, to propose the rule. And so today, we are actually voting on whether or not to adopt a final rule. This is significant and this is historic. It is the first time historically that the Commission on Human Rights has actually done rulemaking on a substantive provision of the law. So I'm ecstatic. I know some of my staff is ecstatic. And I can tell you, just from what I've heard from the public, there are a lot of people, advocates, people who are in the legal advocacy community, who are also very excited because they see this as a very clear and transparent way that they're going to be able to move cases along quickly. I will also tell you that folks from the, our employer constituents in the city are also very pleased that we're doing this, again, because it adds another degree of transparency to the process. You have all received copies of the rule prior to the meeting, I think last week. I had not heard back any questions on the proposed rules. And so I think what I can do now then is ask if there is a motion to adopt our Fair Chance rules. Is that right? Okay. So would anyone like to? And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? And no abstentions, right.
And just for the record, we're turning around Kathy Albiza, so the video can record the vote.
Excellent. Wow, so that is historic. We just made history at the Commission on Human Rights. Yes. Woo, okay. So a second vote we have here is to adopt a final rule that delegates authority to the commissioner and chair, to propose rules prior to their final enactment, kind of consistent with things that we've done in the past. Again, this is something that went out to all the commissioners here. I had heard no questions or comments. Would anyone like to move to adopt this rule?
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? And no abstentions. Great. It's carried. Fabulous. And then our final vote is a vote to propose rules on credit discrimination in employment. So the New York City Human Rights Law also has a provision barring the use of credit history in employment. It is, again, one of the areas of the City Human Rights Law that's considered fairly unique. Other jurisdictions have looked to us as an example of why and how this can be done. The law in New York City became effective in September of 2015. because it's a fairly new and a fairly unique piece of legislation, this is also an area in which constituents across the city, whether they be advocates, legal advocates, or they be employers, have also asked for more clarity and transparency. So we initially released legal enforcement guidance in this area that was well received, I think, across the board. And then we engaged in rulemaking in this area as well. Or we want to engage in rulemaking in this area as well to follow up the legal enforcement guidance. So we are now voting to allow us to propose rules on credit discrimination, and then we will follow this up with a hearing and notice and comment period, just as we did with the ban the box protection. So would anyone like to move to propose rules on credit discrimination in employment?
I so move.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any objections? Ooh, thanks, Kathy. Any objections? Any abstentions? Wonderful, yes. Thank you all. We're so excited to have completed those votes. Excellent, okay. I am going to say too, can somebody actually contact Sharon? Because I know she was twisting herself in a pretzel to be here for the votes. Since we've been able to do it, someone should contact her so she can do what she needs to do. Okay, excellent. Okay, now there are several new faces around our table, and I think since we have enough new faces, it probably makes sense for us to go around completely so that all of you have a sense of, you know, who you are, which borough you're in, what's the type of work you do, so maybe your organization also, and a little bit about yourself, so people have a flavor of, you know, the composition of this body. Does that sound good? Jonathan, can you start us off?
Sure, I'm Jonathan Greenspun. I was appointed to the commission in November of 2014. I spent approximately 10 years in government in a community relations capacity with both the state and the city. I was formerly commissioner of the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit from 2002 to 2006. My role with the commission is to assist with outreach primarily to the Jewish community in New York, and I do that in coordination and consultation with fellow board member Rabbi Sharon Klein.
I'm Demetrius Carolina, pastor of the First Central Baptist Church in Staten Island, New York, executive director of the Central Family Life Center in Staten Island, New York, president of Clergy with a Purpose, which is an ecumenical clergy group citywide. Its headquarters is in Manhattan, New York, and I'm a professor at St. John's University. So I'm glad to be on the board.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Choi. I'm the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. We are an umbrella agency for about 175 member agencies all across New York State, and we are a policy and advocacy group. I live in Queens. Is there any more relevant information?
That's good. And just so everyone here knows, so I'm Carmelyn Malalas. I'm obviously the chair and commissioner here at the Commission on Human Rights. My background is actually in employment law. So prior to coming to city government, I was a partner at Outten and Golden. We did employee side employment law. I also have quite a bit of history doing specifically LGBTQ rights, as well as disability and family discrimination type protections.
I'm Faiza Patel. I work at the Brennan Center for Justice, which is down the street here, not too far, part of NYU Law School, where I am the co-director of the program that works on national security issues. As part of my portfolio, I think I have done a lot of work on racial and religious discrimination by law enforcement, both at the federal and at the local level, with the NYPD in particular. I also do a lot of work with Muslim communities here in New York and also nationally, absorbing people's concerns and developing proposals to address them. And finally, I do a lot of work on data privacy issues, so looking forward to exploring some of that stuff with you guys as well.
My name is Gurdev Singh Kang. I'm living in Staten Island. I'm the community board member in 2 Staten Island since year 2002. And I represent the Sikh community. Sikh community has a large temple in Queens. Approximately membership is around 10 to 15,000 members of the congregation. but I've been representing as a president since year 2012 to 16. And plus I'm the member of the clergy region with my friend in One Police Plaza. And I'm the religious faith committee member with the New York Mayor Advisory Committee members. As long as I have my own business too with the real estate. And I'm my own business, and I'm mostly activities to many of our communities, Sikh community and all the other religions like the Muslim community, everyone, Hindu community, when we have a celebration together and we are participating all over the New York City. And we, like Sikh community, first we feel we are in a minority, but now we are feel with the everyone, friends with the neighbors, we are mostly Sikh people come from immigrant from Punjab and India. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bishop Sylvita Hamilton Gonzalez, and I am in Brooklyn, Central Brooklyn. I joined the board in 2016. I'm the founder of Academy School of Science and Technology, and also Women of Great Esteem, which is an organization that honors women from around the world and around the nation. I'm the voice of our commission in our community, especially for the immigrant community and what they're facing right now. Some of my parents and members of the community, we're trying to keep that alive. So I'm working hard to make sure that we keep our members here in America. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Kari Nazar White. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Brotherhood Sister Soul. It's a comprehensive youth development organization based in Harlem. We're a citywide agency. We work in 3 different spaces, providing comprehensive services to young people from 8 to 21, community organizing training, arts-based education, international study, environmental education, jobs, employment, kind of wraparound services as one would expect. Also protective services such as legal representation and mental health support. We then train folks on our model across the city and internationally to institute similar programming in other communities. And then we work on issues of social justice and organizing, specifically around criminal justice reform, police reform, immigration issues, and some issues having to do with education as well. And so I guess here representing young people and Black and Latino youth who are overwhelmingly the population that we work with. And I'm on a couple of other boards that I think intersect with this work here. I'm on about 6 boards, but there are 2 that specifically intersect. And that's Community Service Society, and I'm on their board of trustees. And we work around issues having to do with poverty here in the city. And then the Young Men's Initiative, which is working around quote-unquote disconnected young men here in the city. So there's certainly some intersections between that and the work of the commission.
Great. Thanks, Kari. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Alvisa. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Had a bit of a family emergency. I'm a former litigator, and I run an organization now called the National Economic and Social Rights Initiatives. We work with community groups around the country, supporting campaigns that seek racial and economic justice through a human rights vision. And my role on the commission, I've decided, is to do whatever Carmen asks me.
And she's doing very
That
well.
seems wise.
Yes, yes. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for Skyping in. One of our other new commissioners is Carrie Davis. Carrie had, prior to being appointed, she had already made plans to be out of the country at this time. So I'm going to read her bio for folks who don't know her. So from 1998 to 2016, Carrie Davis worked at the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center, most recently serving as the Chief Programs and Policy Officer. She served as an adjunct lecturer at Hunter College's Silberman School of Social Work, and she'll be receiving Hunter's 2017 Trailblazer Award in recognition of her outstanding achievements as a social worker. She worked extensively with and serves on numerous advisory boards for New York City and New York State to develop guidelines, policies, regulations, and best practices to better address the needs of LGBT people. In 2015, she was named a Woman of Distinction by New York State Senate in recognition of her contributions to enrich the quality of life in her community. She's also written and contributed to a number of publications on gender, health, and social services. I'll also add, it's not here in her bio, but I'll also add that New York City has had protections against discrimination on gender identity and gender expression since 2002, fairly early on. As you may or may not know, New York State still does not have that as an explicit protection. New York City has that as a protection thanks to the work of many advocates in the city, and Carrie Davis is actually one of them. So she's long been an advocate for transgender communities and gender identity and gender protections in the city. And so we were very excited also to have her join the board. She's also been doing a lot of work, I think, with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene on issues affecting LGBTQ communities. And we, from a policy perspective, have also been engaging DOHMH on many of those things. So it's been great having her on board for that. She's also been working with us on some of the issues that we've been taking up with the Department of Corrections. So very excited to have her. Oh, and here's Sharon.
Sorry about that.
No.
Trains are crazy.
No worries. Wherever you would like to be. Sharon, we've just gone around, since we have a bunch of new faces around. Do you mind if we get you a cup of water, and at the same time you go ahead and introduce yourself?
You ready for me to do that?
We are ready.
I'm Sharon Kleinbaum, the Senior Rabbi of Congregation Basin Plateau at New York City's LGBTQ Synod, the largest in the world, and very dedicated to the struggle for human rights for all human beings.
Excellent. Thanks.
Enough?
Yes.
Excellent.
So Sharon, I'm excited to say that we have quorum. We were able to vote. I know if you need to leave early, you go ahead and do it whenever you need to. Okay. Great. So we're going to talk a bit about some of the recent updates for the commission. Like I said earlier, this is the last quarterly meeting of this fiscal year. The city's fiscal year ends at the end of June. So, on Friday is the last day of 2017, and then we go into fiscal year 2018. You have all now, I think, seen or been able to review our annual report from 2016. And if you have, you've seen that reporting in the agency, as I was talking with some folks earlier, is up significantly. So reporting up in the agency, just in 2016, was up by 60%, 60, which is very significant. And if people will probably also note that while, if you look at hate crimes reporting by criminal law enforcement agencies, if you look at hate bias attacks or acts of hate violence reporting, even with the Southern Poverty Law Center or CUNY Clear or any number of organizations, Steve, you probably also have some stats at your fingertips, has been consistently up in the last year plus. The fact that we've been up by 60% is generally trending higher than what we're seeing with other statistics. And what I take from that is that I think, one, so we're obviously in line with an uptick with those other areas, but I think that the significance of us being up to the degree that we're up also shows that I think there's a renewed confidence in the City Commission on Human Rights. Thanks very much to the commissioners who sit on this body, but also, of course, to the amazing staff that I'm very privileged to work with at the City Commission on Human Rights, just across the agency. I think whether we're looking at law enforcement, please.
And there's this new amazing commissioner.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Kathy. But so I think, whether you're looking at what happens in law enforcement and, in the Law Enforcement Bureau, I can just say that we now have legal advocacy groups, organizations that file cases at the commission that never filed here before, and especially kind of stayed away from filing at the agency. So there are folks now who file here that didn't file before. There are also private attorneys employee side attorneys or civil rights type law firms that file at the agency that never filed here before. So that is also significant. On the community relations side, we've been making a lot of progress working with communities across the city, across the 5 boroughs that have had no relationship with the agency before. And I mean that very specifically. I'm oftentimes at events or programs, and I'll kind of just throw out to the audience, how many people here have heard of the Commission of Human Rights before, or how many people here have had any sort of interaction with the agency before, and it is not uncommon for people to say that they had no interaction before. So we will have that initial interaction, but we've also have been, I think, very good at following up. So we're not just talking about these kind of one-shot engagements. We're actually able to follow up with them so that we're going into their communities for their community events, or we're going for their faith-based gatherings, and they're getting to actually know the staff at the different offices. I think it's been fairly significant. So with this increase, and then, obviously there's also been all the work that we are doing on the communication side. As I was saying earlier, if you've heard about us, or if you've seen us on ads or social media or whatever, it's thanks to Carmen and her team, and that is true, because there was no communications team at the Commission on Human Rights prior to these 2.5 years. So it's significant that we have visibility in a way I think that we did not have before. With all of this, and with the increased productivity and the increased reporting at the agency, we had entered into our budget season talks, requesting support kind of across the different areas of the agency. However, as many of you have probably heard, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen with federal funding for the city. And so people have been operating under, more cautious times, and with that there is actually across agencies, there's a citywide hiring freeze unless the hires are considered essential staff, right?
Yeah,
Director Critical Services. And so it has been very difficult for us to be able to grow in this next fiscal year. Notwithstanding what I just said, I think that the relationship building that we've been doing for the past 2 years has been very helpful in our budget process, because the mayor and the city council heard from several different community organizations and community groups of the real need to support the Commission on Human Rights. And, despite the uncertainties across the city, the fact that the Commission is actually a place where a lot of communities that really don't have a relationship with government, where it's actually a place where they can go, it's been very meaningful. And so as a result of those, the outcry from these different communities, our budget actually did increase in the next fiscal year. So in fiscal 18, we're going to be growing by an additional 26 personnel lines.
Wow.
And for this, it's nice to hear the West, because sometimes in other crowds you're like 26. But for this agency, it's significant, right? Because just to remind people, when I walked in the door in February of 2015, our staff lines were at 55. And then in that next budget cycle, we went up to 121. Then we went up to 131, and so we're adding an additional 26. So it's been considerable growth for this agency. But I think there's also obviously real need for that, right? So one thing is that we're going to have this additional addition of 26 lines. Most of them are going to go into the Law Enforcement Bureau, because I am concerned, and we have concerns about with the increased reporting, also making sure that we have actual justice, not such delayed justice in these cases that it becomes almost mooted, and we're worried about backlogs, so we want to make sure that happens.
Can I ask a question? What's
Sure.
your average time for getting, from complaint to resolution? If you're going through the law enforcement, maybe
Sure.
It's similar to litigation in the sense that some cases can resolve really quickly if the other side is cooperative, and other cases can be very drawn out. So the average doesn't really reflect kind of like what happens in every case, but it's average about a little bit over a year that a case can be from investigation from the initial filing to determination. And then the litigation phase is a second, if it has to go into litigation, or if it can't
I mean, I'll add to that, I think we aspire to shorten that period, but I'll also say that processing time is not, inconsistent with, folks who are filing at EOC, or even if you look at court processing times.
But as much, we want it to be, we want to be able to respond
Yeah.
more quickly, and when we get an extra amount of staff, we're looking forward to being able to have some things on a faster track and respond immediately to some situations.
The other significant addition in our 2018 budget is that we have finally been able to baseline a communications budget, which is very significant. When I first got to the agency, our budget was less than $10,000 for communications purposes.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. And in the last, 2 years, it has been very difficult for us as a small agency without a history of communications work to really be able to show and demonstrate why we need a communications budget. There was just not very much, because there had not been a history of it, and because a lot of folks were not familiar with what the Commission on Human Rights was really supposed to be doing. And so much of the budget process relies on precedent and history, it had been something of an uphill battle. And so for us now, finally, in fiscal year 2018, to have a baselined comms budget is very significant. And again, a testament to, the success of all the campaigns that we've had in the prior, 2+ years. So I'm hoping that folks have seen the current campaign, and I know that Carmen's going to talk about that a little. This is probably a great time for you to talk about it, in fact.
Sure. This is our FY16 campaign. In my first year, we actually did like 2 campaigns, which is a lot for a small communications department. But this is a campaign that followed months of research and feedback from the community. A lot of community members with the roundtables. We also did about 8 or 9 sessions of focus groups with some of the communities that are portrayed in these ads. The campaign is citywide. We have put a lot of attention in the hyper-local outreach. Over 40 newspapers, ethnic and community newspapers on radio. We're having our ads during the 6 weeks of the duration of the campaign. We also have the posters in a lot of neighborhoods, houses of worship, bodegas, laundromats in English and Spanish, and we're going to expand that to other languages in the summer. Thanks to the new budget.
Yes. I'm going to pause and say, language access and community engagement have been very important to us. We've really prioritized that at the agency. So in line with that, are we at 80% now? About almost 80% of our media ad buys are in ethnic and community media. This is also how we want to create relationships in communities, letting them know that we're communicating with them through the means with which they receive their news, and they also feel that the city is involving itself and committing itself to working with community.
And I also wanted to say that was hand in hand with the ethnic community media investment is also the minority media business enterprise vendors that we work with in communications projects. So we have the big campaign, but we also have monthly marketing outreach. That is smaller than this. This is a big undertaking, but we also do a lot of monthly marketing outreach, like placing ads in some of the Jewish newspapers, and I wanted to thank Jonathan for guiding us to some of the papers that we were, we finally got the ads on the 22nd and 23rd of June in some of those newspapers, and it's the first time, I think, when we are publishing and getting the commission messages in some of these newspapers. Was the first time they were hearing from us. So aside from that, we also have very robust digital outreach. We've had a lot of thoughts on how do we get to some of the more cultural segments, and are investing in some of the created 3 videos that we are having on YouTube, which are targeted populations to Hulu, NYC TV, Facebook. We also created with our community relations team events to talk about the campaign. And I wanted to say that also this is an evergreen campaign. We're gonna, the core of the placements is on the June 30th, this Friday, but we are extending, we are basically keeping, doing a second round of ad placement, and we're doing also
Yeah, we have, so this is also consistent with what our practice has been in the last 2 years of, basically convening roundtable type discussions at the commission. Right after the election, when there was, probably a spike in anxiety in different communities, we basically convened, I want to say 8 different roundtable discussions. We did one with LGBTQ communities and leaders. We did one with racial justice related. We did 3 that were focused on workers' rights, and we did 3 that were focused on interfaith and faith-based communities. And several of you participated in those roundtables, and they were invaluable. We always want what we're doing in terms of campaigns to be responsive and relatable to what we're actually hearing in the roundtables, so that if folks are asking us, why are we doing this campaign, or why are we focusing on X issue, we always have something to go back to. So any questions on the campaign?
I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious, sort of how do you allocate between, say, like a poster campaign versus digital? What's your strategy in terms of optimizing that?
These platforms do have a minimum buys, so you do have to go with certain that is the case for subway ads, for instance, and transportation ads. We also get a lot of proponents with both shelters and also NYC Link, which is the digital booth that the city has a program. So we are in all those platforms in the 5 boroughs. Definitely with the investment for this campaign in anything a community media is almost $100,000. So just thinking of the original amount that I get for the campaign, or just addition for the campaign, that I can do revision of just kind of different targets and things like that. It just depends on the cost too. Some media platforms are very expensive, so that they are really out of reach for us.
Do you ever ask people who reach out to the commission how they heard of the commission?
We have in the intake form of the Law Enforcement Bureau. We're also thinking of other ways, like after events, we're kind of doing more surveys now, just part of the event, it's kind of working with other events. After the Pink and Blue campaign of the bathroom access, we ran a study of ad recognition. Basically got a market research firm to do a survey over the phone and online with a sample population of 500 people in the 5 boroughs. And we got a high recall, which is kind of like what people do remember. Of course, this campaign was very special. We are having a campaign that is running at the same time with other discrimination campaigns, like the state campaign, the ones that you've seen in the subway. So we're going to do the same with this campaign, and just kind of try to find out what we also asked in that survey, what are all the campaigns that you wanted to see from the Commission on Human Rights. And the detail that came up after the Pink and Blue campaign was race, immigration, religion. It's kind of like so we're trying to address some of these issues here.
Yep.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? Are you concerned that that the state campaign and the city campaign are going to confuse people?
Yeah, they do confuse.
Yeah.
Even the media unfortunately,
What can
we
you
don't
do?
know when they're launching their campaigns. That would be nice to know. But definitely, even the media was a little bit, are you running that campaign too? So we had to answer questions. No, that is a state campaign. We're doing, this is our campaign. So just clarifying that. And definitely, when I build that questionnaire for the survey that we're going to run after the campaign, I have to make sure to add some ways for people to know that was our campaign, that was exactly our campaign. So I have to kind of really be specific about what they saw, because otherwise, regular citizens don't really have that kind of layers of who's who in the government, state, city, the Blasio, they just don't have that.
And I think also, when our folks are out there speaking to different groups, I think we're pretty explicit that we are the City Commission on Human Rights. Sometimes if people just talk about the Commission on Human Rights, people will confuse it with the State Division of Human Rights. Yeah. I will just say too, I think folks in the legal advocacy community are pretty clear on the distinctions between the two agencies.
Sure.
So, but yeah, for those purposes. The other thing I'll add on this is, I mentioned before language access and that being a huge priority of ours. It has been, some of you have heard me talk about this before, we've really made a push to make sure that as we get increased lines at the commission, the people who work here, look and sound like the people that they're talking to in the city. When I first got here, we had 6 languages spoken across the agency. Now because of turnover, I think we peter back and forth between like 27 and 29. Including, several, I think there was 1 or 0, commonly spoken languages, South Asian type languages, and so now we have like Punjabi and Malayalam and Gujarati, Hindi and Urdu and several other languages. We didn't really have very much language capacity before with East Asian languages. We have Korean, we have several Chinese languages. I think we have 1 Japanese speaker. So we're really trying to, I don't think we had somebody doing any outreach with any, that was an Arabic speaker. We have, I think, now 3 Arabic speakers. So we're really trying to make sure that our staff has the language capabilities. And I will tell you that it has been very helpful because it has enabled us, as we're doing work with certain communities, to obviously do presentations or workshops in a language that is, most well understood in those communities. It's also enabled us for media purposes to be doing ethnic media and do it in a variety of different languages. So that has been, and that's been a point I think that communities have actually identified for us as being a change that they have seen at the commission.
Yeah, we're also getting a lot of reporters, like just not only placing ads in these newspapers, the reporters are coming to our events more. We've seen a substantial amount of just more attention just by sending us emails, wanting them to be added to our press list, coming to the event, running really good, thorough segments on the work of the commission. So there's definitely more attention from ethnic newspapers in other languages.
Right. So Carmen also mentioned that in line with the campaign, we've also been running different events through the last 2 months that are connected to the general idea of the campaign. The last of those events will be happening tomorrow in Brooklyn. We'll be in Bed-Stuy, and I'm looking right now at Bishop Silvetta because she will be there as well. So we've been thinking a lot internally about how we want to, and actually Reverend Carolina, we've had discussions on this too, about how we want to be more explicit and more just kind of out there talking about race issues and race, and having more frank discussions amongst communities about race. The Commission on Human Rights has obviously a very important civil law enforcement mandate, but another very important mandate that we have at the Commission through community outreach specifically is, how do we talk in communities and how do we diffuse inter-community tension? How do we address issues that occur, between different communities? Like if I look at the work the Commission has done historically, for instance, Commission on Human Rights specialists were some of the folks on the ground at the time of the, the conflicts in Crown Heights, right? And so as we're thinking about the period that we're in now and what we're finding within communities and some of the challenges and the conflicts that are arising within the city now, we want to be moving our work towards having more discussions within communities about these issues and having a place where communities can air out some of these topics. Marissa Jackson, who is our new Deputy Commissioner for the Community Relations Bureau. She's actually spearheading the event that we're having tomorrow. Do you want to talk about it, Marissa?
Sure. So, hello everybody. Thank you for letting me speak to you for a minute. So tomorrow we are having what is essentially sort of a flagship event that's attached to our You Have the Right campaign. And this event is titled Race, Community, and Human Rights in Bed-Stuy. So it is really talking about sort of, demographic change and all the things that come with that. And importantly, as relates to our mandate, how government can ensure the protection of human rights as demographic changes occur. So we're going to really be focusing on protections against discrimination based on race, on religion, and any number of protected classes as it relates to sort of housing, economic justice, employment. And so it's we're hoping to get into a really rich and hopefully frank discussion around some of the issues, what people call gentrification, but basically how the commission can join with the communities in protecting human rights as neighborhoods evolve, and how we can make sure that evolution of neighborhoods benefits longtime residents as well as newcomers.
You want to mention some of the folks on the program?
Yes. So it's going. You have a question? Okay.
Mr. Singh would like to know where.
Yes, absolutely. So it's going to be tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Plaza in the Billie Holiday Theater. It is going to feature some really special guests. So we'll have the public advocate will be there. Assembly member Tremaine Wright will be there. Minister Kirsten John Foy, and also Michelle Laguerre, who is a social worker at SAGE, who also was a longtime Bedside resident who I understand was sort of gentrified out of the neighborhood. And we also have Rabbi Bob Kaplan.
Yes.
And the conversations will be sort of moderated and directed by WNYC's Kai Wright, who did There Was a Neighborhood podcast and is now the host of United States of Anxiety. So it's going to be a really exciting evening.
Yeah, we're very excited about it.
Great.
So.
Thank you.
And we've been kind of emailing you all updates every week. Hopefully you all get our kind of comms updates and things that are going on, things that have happened at the commission as well as things that will be going on. Maybe we'll send you another email blast about this specific thing in case you want to forward it out to folks on your listservs for your groups, because I think it'll be a very exciting conversation. We also had a pretty exciting day of action and press conference recently on housing discrimination. There's a law enforcement component to this, and there's also kind of a comms component to this. Hollis and Carmen, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, there were a few media articles on this issue over the course of like maybe 5 days, and we were also working with community groups on the same issue. People decided after the 5 days of very heavy media attention on this issue that we should put together an event, press conference, and a day of action. So we worked.
Can you just identify what the specific issue was with the?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So it was the issue of landlords requesting immigration status information, either proof or just asking questions in regards to immigration status to tenants in some buildings. There were some specific buildings in Queens that were in the media. So.
Can I pause for a minute, just because I want to do shout out to the team? So, the articles that Carmen is talking about, part of it was because at some point in time, the governor took an interest to this, and the AG took an interest in this. But I want to say that Hollis and her team were kind of first on the spot on this, and I'll leave it to Hollis.
Brought Sapna Raj, our assistant commissioner, a copy of the landlord's letter even before it came out in the media. So it was interesting that we were able to. She sent out a cease and desist letter right away. The landlord had hand-delivered all the tenants a letter saying that they had to provide proof of immigration status as a condition of renewing their lease. And so we were kind of talking about how we were going to address it from a law enforcement perspective. We prepared a cease and desist letter, and then all of a sudden it also exploded in the media. So it was a nice opportunity to be able to send a strong message that both of the commission were going to respond quickly to these kinds of incidents,
Yep.
and that it was we wanted to make sure it was amplified that this is a clear violation of the city human rights law.
The press conference was great for that. Since there was so much media attention, so we got 25 media outlets from like mainstream media to ethnic media, also Hispanic. Musari on the Move is a great housing Hispanic organization with a lot of relationships with the Hispanic media. So we got not only media stories on the day after, but also a few days after in the Hispanic media. And the media are very interested in our law enforcement work, scenarios, and also the statistics that we have in this we're gonna have more out days in the next few weeks.
Yeah. So something I want to emphasize, because I think it's timely, is that, you know, the city human rights law is explicit on providing protections against discrimination based on alienage and immigration status. That is not the case for federal law necessarily, or the federal remedy. Important. Not as, you know, it's not a Title VII based remedy, it's a Immigration Nationality Act type based remedy. So I'll just plainly say the remedy isn't as good. But the state law is not explicit on that issue. So we do think of this as being a very important thing to be raising within communities, so that specifically, regardless of what somebody's immigration status is, if they are being treated differently, basically in any area of city life, they may file a claim at the Commission on Humans. We will investigate it. And we also have the understanding that people are differently situated. It might not be in their best interest necessarily to go forward and file a complaint or something of that nature. And so there are times when we will just go in even without making somebody put their name forward on a complaint or having to identify themselves. And we will either go forward with perhaps a cease and desist letter, or our law enforcement bureau will initiate an investigation, or someone on Marissa's team on the Community Relations Bureau will come in and start having conversations with, you know, whoever the purported bad actor is or the folks in the community, so that we're raising awareness in the community that it's not an okay practice. I want to leave some time for discussion on this, because I think it's a very timely thing to talk about, and we're seeing more and more variation on this.
So toward that end, looping back to what Hollis had said earlier about timing. So this obviously looks like this was a very egregious violation that this landlord had instigated. So how do you all triage this? Because the standard answer we received a few minutes ago is, well, it could take upwards of a year. This obviously isn't taking upwards of a year. So what are there certain cases that are on your radar that sort of supersede the process of, well, we have to take it, we have to write it down, we have to do a preliminary investigation of it? Could you just talk to that a little bit? Because timing here is obviously of the essence in these cases.
When this was not a public complaint, so a community organization had brought it to us, and it was a facial violation. So when it's a clear violation, we have a document that says this is a violation, we can jump over the kind of, to some degree, the investigative process where we would hear from one side and then hear from the other and interview witnesses and go to, in order to come to the conclusion that yes, this is a violation, and then act. So this was a unique situation where we had a document where we could very clearly come out, and we also didn't have any tenants coming. We now may have tenants coming forward after the event and after the organization identified them and start a separate public complaint process, but this was a sort of unique situation in a number of ways. For public complaints, when people are coming to us to file their own claim, right now we have a narrow set of fast track facts, and because of current caseloads and staffing, it's a pretty small set. It's people who are trapped in their homes, people facing homelessness, a lot of the disability accommodation. We fast track cases where an accommodation is needed in the workplace, and we could intervene to try to get that done, but it comes up most often in housing.
Or access issues, somebody's trapped in their apartment, they can't leave their apartment because of an access issue.
Yeah.
So those are other things that we'll react on very quickly.
Discriminatory harassment when there's an allegation of violence. There are a number of other priority areas where we're looking, like these immigration status cases or gender identity cases. Again, if we're seeing things that are very clear, where we can act in a way on behalf of the commission and also get some attention to be able to send a message to the community that these are not, that these are violations of the city human rights law. But for public complaints, I think those are the main issues that we can fast track.
And one more question. Is this, to your knowledge, the first instance since, say, the election in which a landlord did this, or there have been other?
We have a number of, we've definitely seen an increase in these kinds of claims and more explicit the authority to events of deportation. We hadn't had yet a case where, in some ways, it was safer for us to act because the individuals hadn't come forward. We were able to, like I said, act as the commission without balancing this question of whether an undocumented immigrant, for example, might be putting themselves at some risk by putting some attention on it. So we have public complaints and investigations pending on behalf of people who have brought immigration status related discrimination to us. But this is our first opportunity to really be public about it without having to do a risk assessment for an individual.
You know, I know the governor and several state electeds really tried to jump on this and make a big fuss. We usually do that. I'm wondering, you know, was there an effort to communicate, coordinate by the State Division of Human Rights at all? And I know that because you mentioned that it's much less explicit on the state level. You should talk to your buddy Alfonso Diaz about that. But I do think, like, I'm curious as to whether there was any attempt at communication or coordination from the state.
On this particular one, I'm going to say there wasn't. I'll note a few things, though, from what you've just said, Steve. So one is, frequently with these types of things where they get a lot of media attention, I have said in the past, we're not always going to be the first on the scene, but I want us to have a meaningful response. I think our history so far has borne that out. In this case, we were also the first ones on the scene, I'm happy to say. And then, interestingly, to your point about the State Division of Human Rights, I mean, there have been situations in which, like one example I think is there was a Muslim woman in Grand Central who was pushed down the steps. It received a lot of media attention. I think Governor Cuomo directed the State Division of Human Rights to investigate it. The State Division of Human Rights called Hollis and her team and said, we don't have jurisdiction over this, so we're actually going to refer it to you.
The governor probably thought he had jurisdiction because it occurred in a
Yes.
state facility, which is Grand Central Terminal.
Yes. But there's not a cause of action that could be tied to it under state law. There is a cause of action, which is this, which is why I'm always talking about it, discriminatory harassment, that we have under city law.
And the governor probably thought he had jurisdiction because he's the governor. I do recognize it's being taken.
I'm curious as to, so what percentage of your cases are fast track, right? Like, what would you, sorry, I'm into numbers today, just roughly. And then the second question I had, I thought this issue of risk assessment and the potential for retaliatory measures in the immigration context, is that, so how do you do something like that?
And on the first question, I think probably the best way to answer it, we have our Community Relations Bureau Project Equal Access, and we have some numbers in our annual report, so I can follow up with you.
Okay, that's fine, yeah.
Kind of give you the numbers on what we call successful intervention. So that would give you the stats on when we've fast-tracked, intervened, and succeeded in getting the accommodation, and in terms of, I'll have to look at how we could get you data on just the fast-tracking itself.
But just roughly,
Complicated
what,
various systems.
like, do you have?
I'll check in with our info line director,
Okay.
because I think she could do an anecdotal sense of like how many she's flagging when they come into info line to have a quicker intake and fast track. You know, and I'll note in this area, so what's also important is that we have jurisdiction over city agencies, other city agencies. And I note that in this area because there's oftentimes a situation where somebody's not necessarily coming forward with a complaint and filing a complaint here, but anecdotally, we hear about a policy or practice at another city agency that concerns us. And what has been, I think, invaluable is that over the last 2 years, and this was also why we built up the office of the chairperson from a policy perspective, is that we'll have, usually it's Brittany, Lauren, or Dana, call over first to that agency and say, hey, Commission on Human Rights, we're aware of this. We will help you through this process. We will help you rewrite the policy. We will help do a workshop so you have the training on this. We're going to walk you through this entire process. And we always hope that that is initially this kind of policy attempt works, because I think that has immediate and greater impact. And there are times where that is happening, and at the same time there is somebody from the outside who is filing a complaint because of a similar issue. And so there might be a parallel law enforcement action to this policy discussion.
It's fine.
each borough. We've not, I'm trying to think right now, we've not done one specifically that's just broadly human rights in each borough. We've certainly done things that are like specific to an organization or specific to an issue. It's certainly something that we can do. I mean, Marissa could follow up and we could talk about what something like that would look like.
Toward that end, does the commission at all take advantage of City Hall's borough weeks? Where, for example, there's one coming up in Queens in the middle of next month. There's already been one on Staten Island and one in the Bronx.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they tie in all sorts of events that are not necessarily with the mayor, but that run concurrent with that week. I'm wondering if anyone's...
I mean, we table at those, we have visibility at those. Dana and Marissa, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, at the City Hall in the Bronx, we were part of sort of the resource fair and had events that week in the Bronx that, you know, we could sort of publicize in support of the Mayor's Week. And I think we're trying, essentially planning the same for the week in Queens.
Yeah, and the mayor was also, had us do some on-the-spot interventions as well. So he would just call you up and say, you know, he had a sort of a receiving line of these New Yorkers with concerns, and he would match them with an agency and do some on-the-spot stuff with them as well. So we expect more of the same.
So just to add to that, I think we've increasingly been doing a lot more kind of intervention on the go. So if we know that there's already an event that's taking place, if somebody else is hosting an event, or sometimes it's ours, or oftentimes it's also an elected official is putting something together, we'll either send kind of some intervention folks from CRB, or we can also, we sometimes send lawyers from the Law Enforcement Bureau, and we let everyone know if you want to talk to folks right now, they were on the spot and able to talk to you about concerns or possible complaints. Anyone want to add anything to that? Okay. All right.
You mentioned an increase in staffing over the last few years from 50 some odd people to 130, and now at another 26. Are there similar data points in terms of complaints handled and cases taken on as well by the commission?
Yeah.
Is that something that somebody can tell us, or we need to wait for a report?
Sure. You mean year to year?
I'm just curious, kind of what the graph would look like in terms of how many complaints have come in and been handled, and then I assume there's a next step of once those complaints come in, decisions made.
I can tell you, I can't give you actual numbers right now, but we could always follow up with the actual numbers. We've consistently gone up in complaints. There are certain areas of complaints that we have, like I know, for instance, for sexual orientation, if I look at sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression over the last 2 years, we've more than doubled in those types of complaints. And specifically, like, I think if I look from 2015 to 2016 with sexual orientation complaints, I think we went up by 40%. If I look at complaints of gender identity or gender expression related discrimination, I think in 2014, we had 1 complaint. The following year, I want to say we had something like 15, and then now we have something like 30. If I look at race, national origin, religion, and immigration status, over the last year, we've gone up. And race. If I look at just the last year, we've gone up by over 30%. If I isolate race, okay, now is when I'm going to have to revert to sending you further information.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a very related question, which is to the extent that you have a dashboard or coming to the close of the fiscal year and there is an annual report or some sort of summary, I think that would be helpful both for us to look at that and be able to understand sort of at a glance what the commission is doing, what the priorities have been, and then also a document that I think moving forward allows us to see exactly what's happening.
So here's the interesting. We, by statute, we are mandated to do an annual report that comes out every March, and the annual report covers every calendar year. That's by statute. So it doesn't match the fiscal year. So our last annual report came out this past March, covering 2016. That was emailed to everyone. We also have hard copy. And Edwin, do you mind? We can also give you the hard copies of them before you leave. Okay. But that has and we're basically working with the city council right now and the administration to change the period that we have to do the annual report
So it, along, yeah.
Fiscal year.
And I'll just note that the mayor's management report is based on the fiscal year calendar, and we can send out our reporting for that, which will be published in September for the prior fiscal year, which won't align perfectly with the annual report, and also the indicators are a little different, which we're also working on completely revamping. But it'll help give you, we could provide some talking points or some information about how the data has changed year over year.
But as I said, we're working with them to change, to amend the statute so that it will be in line with the fiscal year and much more understandable to people.
Just a question for the Law Enforcement Bureau on discriminatory harassment. Can you give us just some instances of actual recourse that individuals have had? I mean, look, in thinking of the scenarios here, so let's just assume that the victim has video of the person who made the comments. We can then identify who that is. So let's say you identify who it is. What do? Do you contact that person and say you're now in violation of the human? I mean, how does this all play out?
If the person is identifiable and the victim wants to file a complaint and use the traditional enforcement process, then it follows the same as any other claim. So a complaint would be drafted, a complaint would be served on the accused person. They would have a chance to respond, investigation begins. Very exact same process as a traditional employment discrimination or public accommodations or housing claim. This provision is new. We had maybe one or two of those kinds of cases pending when it became even more important to do more outreach and use this provision. So we actually don't have any. I think we have a couple cases that are headed. We have one case headed toward prosecution that is a neighbor-to-neighbor discriminatory harassment claim. We have one that's headed that is also, I think it's it has some housing landlord and a neighbor-to-neighbor situation that's headed toward mediation. I think we have a couple cases that will soon be in the remedy stage.
Let me add to that too. I mean, what's interesting about this particular area, discriminatory harassment, is it's a very unique area, meaning that I think we've identified maybe 2 other jurisdictions that have something like this, but the way it's written under the city statute is very broad. Something that the lawyers in the room will appreciate is there's no precedent on it. There's 0 precedent on it for how it's interpreted and, you know, how much breadth should be given to the language of the statute. So I say it's exciting, but it's also, you know, it's touchy.
Yeah. No, someone could challenge it on First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
You have a
Yes, absolutely. And these are conversations that we have been engaging in. And if, you know, to the extent that folks in this room have an interest in being involved in those conversations, I think we would welcome it. But I think that's exactly right. Like, we've trying to draw the parameters around what this would mean has been, I want to say, almost an obsession of Lauren's, for one thing, and Zoe's. And so we've been thinking about how we could perhaps gather more information on the public so that we have an understanding as a community on what this should actually include. What's a little bit touchy for me as well is I generally have felt uncomfortable about being the person or the entity to cabin the city human rights law, because I generally love celebrating how broad it is. And this is an area where, you know, I think
The free speech is also
yes.
rights.
So we're going to have to figure out what are the comfortable parameters in this area.
I think it's a really tricky question. I mean, I often have it even looking at a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, you know, tracks hate incidents, right? I mean, there's a difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. And so drawing that line, I think, is very difficult. And when you look at sort of the experience of countries that ban hate speech, it's not very comforting that it will be used in a way that actually protects minorities rather than simply in a way that just reflects political reality, I think. So.
I'd just like to add a concern that I have that probably is just overshadowing or on the same line. There is gentrification happening, you know, all over our city, and I think that there's some discriminatory harassment happening when every day you get a phone call or you receive a mail that says we want to buy your property. I've been speaking about this for a while. You know, our district attorney passed away, Ken Thompson, and I did bring it to his attention. So how do we do this? Why should we be subject to being asked every day, sell me your property?
The city council passed a law that actually gives tenants recourse in that regard. If their answer is no, the landlord, I believe, is prohibited from even raising the question for, I think, upwards to a year, possibly longer. So the city council addressed that issue almost a year ago. I mean, we could, I'm sure someone here can get you that info. It doesn't mean that there isn't violation. People violate the law every day.
I'm talking about homeowners,
It's the
people
same
that
thing.
own their own home,
Yeah.
that are now being harassed. I can give you a stack of letters this high, and they come to the door and they knock and they call you on the phone. You know, I go, how did you get my cell phone number? And why are you calling me? Or your house shows up on somebody's brochure that said, you know, house for sale.
Yeah, that's already.
It's really a very, you know, bad situation that's happening in my district where I live. And I've been trying my best to find out, how do we address this? What gives one organization, whether it's a developer or another person in the community, the right to come and harass me to buy my property? What right do I have? And how do I address that? Which is something I've been telling my neighbors we're going to get together and fight against.
Bishop, I'm going to suggest that Brittany or Dana will follow up with you
Thank you.
on that. Okay. I want to be respectful of time. We have about 4 minutes left. I guess kind of two of the concluding things I'd say is, for some of the issues that we've discussed today, particularly on the discriminatory harassment piece, if there are commissioners who are interested in working with us directly on that, I think we would welcome it.
What about, I'm sorry.
On the
Yes.
discussion we had about kind of the, how do we define this and how the interplay between discriminatory harassment and someone's First Amendment rights. If there's folks who are interested in working on this, I'm going to ask that they tell Lauren, so we could include you in those conversations. And then separately, if there are folks who we're thinking through how we want to be more involved in what I'm thinking of as kind of community convening. The conversation we're having tomorrow in Bed-Stuy, I think, is an example of this, and again speaks to the Commission's history. Kind of, this is not about a workshop, it's not about, you know, law enforcement come in. This is about having, creating a space where folks in the community can talk about these issues, where we can also provide some, the ability to convene this and kind of a space to do this in. And if there are kind of collateral discrimination or harassment issues come up, we can also address those. But we want to be moving more into this space of how are we working with communities that are having conflicts, or how can we help communities address longstanding conflicts where there is overlap with our areas of protection or with our mandate. So as another example, I'll say, you know, I always say June is a very busy month for us because it's both Ramadan and LGBT Pride Month, and we try to have a great deal of visibility in all the different communities that touches on. And particularly this year, we coordinated an iftar at the LGBT Center. And I've already spoken to some of the commissioners, and I've said, you know, I think it was really groundbreaking to be creating this space with organizations and with community groups that had challenges or conflicts or difficulties relating to each other in the past. And it became a very emotional event. For me, it was one of the most, touching events that I've ever been involved in, ever. But there was a lot of, I mean, this sounds, I don't know, more, this isn't the right word,
but it was nice to see this community healing, if I could say that. That sounds a little self-righteous for government to say that, but it was great to be able to be a part of that. And I think we want to find other spaces in the city, in other communities, where we can have a hand in that. We're, not where we're being intrusive, but where we're actually helping to bring something to the table as a convener, as somebody who can frame this within a human rights related lens or what have you. And so I would challenge all the commissioners to be thinking through what those spaces should be for us, and to be raising this or having a discussion with us about what those spaces can be.
I love that idea. I'm certainly on board with that, and I'm just thinking community campuses would be, I think, an ideal setting for this type of dialogue, both from the perspective of the students as well as from the larger community.
CBOs too,
Yeah,
community-based organizations.
And then I guess the final thing I'd say before people leave is that we're trying to be responsive to folks' suggestions that we pre-schedule commissioners convening. And we've been trying to do that, but then people decline because it's so far out in the future. So Harry's going to try this again. He's going to send out a whole bunch of dates. I'd really like to pre-schedule the next 2 quarterly meetings. Please respond. Please don't decline, because then it's hard for us to keep those dates. And we are hoping to continue moving forward on rulemaking in other areas, so we really do need quorum. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out on a summer day to spend time with us and to be here for the votes and for this meeting. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for
It
the great
is
work.
now 12:30, right on the dot, and we are concluding the meeting. Thank you.